I just had a phenomenal gift to me. It was an audio sent to me by a very close friend of mine. Very, very, very good man, very well-spoken, phenomenal man. And he was inspired by something that I put out in my very first podcast that you guys listened to. And I have to share what I just got from listening to this hour-long sermon that he gave. And it's important to me that I share it. And the reason why it's so important to me is because there is an epidemic, not only with masculinity in modern America, but there's an epidemic with the inability for veterans to understand and recognize that vulnerability is not a fucking liability. The call to be a man in modern society is being trampled. We're no longer allowed or permitted to be masculine. We're not supposed to be men. We're supposed to be effeminate. We're supposed to allow our feelings to dictate our actions. There's this huge push right now, and there has been for some time, to completely demonize the concept of masculinity. And the problem with demonizing masculinity in general is that we are completely taking away the ability for men to be men. And I have to say this because it's really fucking important. There are so many veterans, men and women, that are battling with post-traumatic stress, that are battling with this concept of identity, mission, and purpose. And I talked a little bit about that in the first episode, but there's so many people battling with this concept. There's so many people battling that they are inherently lost. And there's this fear. Oh no, if I open up, if I talk about the problems that I'm facing, then people are going to judge me. I'm going to be shamed, or I'm going to be full of guilt. And there is a fear of not opening up. And he said something that was extremely powerful to me. And he said, if you don't open yourself up to get clean, it will never heal. But he said, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to bear things into the open. It's uncomfortable to get clean. What he was talking about was confession. He was talking about confessing. And speaking to, he's a very religious person. He's just speaking to this concept of confession, or confessing to the internal problems, the demons, the things that hold us back, the pains and tribulations, the carnal mentality. But more importantly than that, and this is the thing that I wanted to share, when I was a kid, I was going down a swimming pool slide where I was growing up. And while I was going down the slide, I slid up onto the edge of the slide, and my hand slapped the edge of the slide really hard. And I thought I was going to come out of the slide, so I kind of grabbed it just a little bit, and it sliced my fingers, and I still have the scars. And it sliced my fingers pretty bad. And I felt some pain initially, but I didn't think anything of it until I got into the water, and when I looked down, I saw this streak of green pouring from my fingers. And I thought, oh, that's not good. And so I climbed out of the pool, and I was holding my hands, and the blood was pooling in my hand. And I walked up to a lifeguard, and I was like, hey, can you help me out with this? And the first lifeguard that I walked up to was a young girl, a young female lifeguard, and she kind of squealed and she ran away. Oh, shit. And then the next lifeguard that came to me was a little bit older, and he said, I got to get some paperwork for liability reasons, but they wouldn't give me medical attention. They wouldn't help me treat the problem. They wouldn't give me medical attention. Now, I was young, but I had taken a lot of first aid courses when I was younger, so I knew that I had to apply direct pressure, and I needed to elevate it above my heart, and I had to do all these things. I was doing these things while they were getting the paperwork. Eventually, I got to the doctor's office, the hospital, and we were going to get sutures because it was that bad. I had to get stitches. And I remember sitting there watching the doctors stick me in order to give me localized anesthetic to numb that space, and they peeled this wound open. They had this iodine scrub and sponge, and they began to just scrub the ever-loving hell out of my hand. And I remember watching, and my hand wasn't completely numb. I have a high tolerance for anesthesia, and I could feel it. Not just pressure, but the pain. And it took them a really long time to get it clean, and they spent all this time to get my hand clean. And then eventually, they went to suture it. But you know, suturing the wound together for it to heal took a third of the time that it took for them to clean the wound. And then for the wound to actually heal, I think it took at least 10 to 100 times longer. than it did for them to clean and suture the wound, because the wound had to heal from the inside out. But the thing that I realized, and the thing that I heard when he was speaking, the thing that I took from this was that in reality, the only way for us to be able to heal these wounds of our past, the trauma that we experienced, is to be vulnerable and bear them to the world. If you aren't willing, listen very closely, if you're a veteran or you're anybody and you're going through pain, you're going through problems, you've experienced some crazy shit in your life, and you want to continue to just keep it bottled up, all it's going to do is fester. It will fester. It will create an infection. And eventually you will have to amputate that part of your body because it will go gangrenous. Or it could potentially create sepsis, and it could infect the entirety of your system, all aspects of your body. If I hadn't have gotten that wound clean and it became infected and the infection wasn't treated, eventually I would have gotten sepsis, and eventually I could have died from it. And I want you to think about this. Now, I don't want to have a fucking conversation about religion. I don't want to talk about the concepts of Christ and God and spiritual well-being. We can talk about that on another day. But I do want to talk about very specifically this concept. You have got some shit in your past. If you're a veteran, if you're a fucking first responder, if you're somebody who has ever had any significant trauma that's happened in their past, something that sticks with them, that they're unwilling to open up, they're unwilling to be vulnerable about, they're unwilling to expose themselves into the world. And I don't mean dropping your pants. I mean literally verbalizing, acknowledging that it happened, recognizing that it's real, recognizing that the fucking pain is still with you. If you don't open up about this, it will fester. It will become septic. It will infect the totality of your fucking being. And while you lay around and while you hope maybe one day that I might be able to move on beyond this, or I might be able to heal from this, it'll never happen. And it'll never happen because of your fear of vulnerability. Being vulnerable is one of the greatest assets that we have in our life. If you have nothing to hide, nothing to lose, and the willingness to walk away, then vulnerability becomes the greatest asset that you have. Because if you have nothing to hide, then it can't be used against you. If you have nothing to lose, then you've already lost what the possibility is, which means that any possibility that comes towards you is a new possibility that you can grasp. And if it doesn't serve you in being better, if it doesn't serve you in growing, if it doesn't serve you in healing, if it doesn't serve you in actually becoming the version of yourself that you want to become, then you can walk away from that piece. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with people, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard from them about their desire to be better, but they still continue to associate with the same people that they associated with in their past. They associated with the same people that brought them to the recognition. Their choices of where all the choices they've made have brought them to where they are now, and they continue to associate and make the same choices, and they continue to close off those pieces. In episode 1, I talked about the concept of being a lion in a cage. The fact of the matter is, and I said this, I said the next cage that I find myself in will be a cage of my own making based on fear. And the fact is, guys, is that we live in a cage on a regular basis because we're so afraid of being judged, or we're so afraid of something in our past being used against us. There's no reason at all for you to suffer in silence. Now, let me make sure I caveat this very clearly. Sometimes silent suffering is a requirement. Sometimes you have to just ruck up and go. Every time you go to the gym, even when you don't want to, I don't give a fuck that you don't want to go to the gym. Go to the gym. Sometimes you got to throw the ruck on your back and just fucking go. And every step that becomes agony, and every step that becomes pain, and all the frustration and discomfort around not sleeping in, not snoozing your fucking alarm, those things are a requirement. That silent suffering is not suffering. That is growth. And that's growth not looking for new recognition from someone else or giving you a pat on the fucking back. It's just a recognition from yourself that you're disciplined enough to continue to do the shit that you don't want to do, even though you know those are the things that are going to help you become better, so you do it fucking anyway. I'm talking about the type of suffering that will ultimately kill you. I'm talking about the type of suffering that will drive you to a place where you're ready to write your suicide note and put a pistol in your mouth. I'm talking about the type of suffering that will become septic and ultimately destroy the entirety of your life And you will never realize the possibility of what life could be if you just were willing to bear the shit that you are hiding. In late 2018, December, I was approached by, who is now a good friend of mine, by a coach, a life coach. I don't know what you would call him, a mentor. I don't fucking know. He's a mentor, he's not a coach. For an organization called Wake Up Warrior. And I was asked to come and be a mentor, a facilitator for a program called Warrior Week. And there was an evolution inside of this Warrior Week where there was another veteran there. And this veteran had been holding on to, he was an army guy, he was in Iraq, and he had been holding on to some shit that happened to him when he was in Iraq. And he'd been holding on to it for a really long time. And he had all this guilt and all this shame inside of him. And this man had overcome so many things. But one of the things that holding on to this guilt and shame did was it drove him into the world of addiction. He couldn't get beyond it. He couldn't get past it. And so he suppressed it, he hid it, and he did whatever he could to try and find a feeling of happiness, joy, or bliss. And he did it in whatever way he could. And so he turned to drugs. And all kinds of fucking shit. And I remember that he had been sober for some time, and his sobriety was hard. It was a hard challenge, but he still couldn't let go of these other feelings and these other emotions. And I remember us having a one-on-one conversation. I remember us talking about this. And he was able to finally just bear it because he hadn't talked about it. He had never spoken about it, but he finally just opened up and put it out there in the world. And all it took was for someone else from a place of understanding and empathy to say, I understand. I know where you are. I fucking get it. I understand 100%. And guess what, bro? You did what you did so that the men to your left and right could make it home to their families, so you could make it home to your families. War is hell. And the human condition that we live in is especially for men, is that we're responsible to protect and provide. We're responsible to carry our own weight. And all too often, we just keep our mouths shut about the problems that we face because it's our problem. And our problems, if we share it with someone else, we don't want it to make it their problem. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. When you are in the military, you have a sense of purpose. You have a sense of fulfillment. You have a sense of significance. And in fact, if you are a first responder, if you've ever lived your life to be purely of service of other people, you find your sense of significance and fulfillment from being of service. And then when you stop in that job and you step away from it and you're no longer of service inside of that job, you lose your sense of purpose. You lose your identity. You also lose your tribe. You lose the people that could potentially understand what the fuck you're going through. But see, therein lies the fucking problem. This idea that no one can understand me. No one can understand what I'm going through. You can't possibly understand what I've been through. You can't possibly understand my experience. That's fucking cool. If that's a story that you want to hold on to that fucking story and continue to be your little victim unicorn self that nobody could ever potentially understand or possibly understand the feelings and emotions that you're having. You're right. You're 100% right. Be in that place. Be in that place and continue to recognize that you're a weak-ass victim bitch. Because that's all you're doing. You're creating a weak-ass bitch victim mentality that says that no one could possibly understand the feelings and emotions that you're having. Viktor Frankl, if you've not read his book, The Man's Search for Meaning, or any of his other works, you have to, specifically talks about this concept and this idea. That the worst thing experienced that you have experienced and the worst thing someone else has experienced, though the experience may be drastically different, the feelings and emotions are the same. Now, I just talked about this idea that we're not supposed to allow feelings and emotions to dictate our actions. No, we're not. However, feelings and emotions give us the opportunity to create empathy. And being empathetic is not a bad thing because it's where we gain understanding and connection. And so you're right, I may not have experienced the same thing that you've experienced or vice versa, but I can tell you definitively without any equivocation that the feelings and emotions of helplessness and hopelessness, of fear, of depression, of sorrow, of a lack of self-worthiness, of a lack of personal value, I can tell you definitively without any question, I have felt the same feelings. I have felt the same feelings. I understand those feelings and where they come from, and I can be empathetic and understanding to those feelings. In one of the other episodes, I told you my story about writing my suicide note, put a pistol in my mouth, and I got a hand up from a brother who's a former SEAL. He didn't give me a handout, he gave me a hand up. But he didn't just give me a hand up with regards to the opportunity to recognize that I have value and worth in something other than just being of service or kicking in doors. He gave me value and worth, and he helped me recognize that the value and worth that I hold personally is not necessarily based on what I do, but based on how my mind functions and operates, the mentality by which I think, the process of how I think, and the content of my character. And it wasn't until I opened up, and he and I have had multiple conversations about this throughout our history as friends, about our past, the battles that we face, the demons that we face. I had a wonderful interaction and experience with another guy. He's a former Delta operator. He's a really, really phenomenal man. Phenomenal man. I think he has a heart of fucking gold, man. And this dude is tied into the history of special operations in this country like nobody else I know. He's just a really spectacular guy. And he battles demons on a regular basis. And he battles demons, and he has a hard time sleeping. And we had conversations about this very same thing. And the fact is that he created a company, created a business, he created a thing that was designed to become a magnet, to build a tribe, to bring former special operations guys together, to bring operators together, to bring law enforcement together, to bring men and women together that have had, quote, unique experiences, that have lost that sense of connection and lost that sense of belonging. But the longer that you believe that you are the only one who has the feelings and emotions that you have, the longer that you believe that you're the only one that can possibly feel the way you feel, the longer that you believe that no one could possibly understand, the longer that you disallow anyone inside, you continue to keep yourself closed off, you continue to isolate yourself from the fucking world and potentially isolate yourself from those who could legitimately understand and provide you some perspective. The longer you go down that route, the harder and more challenging it will become to change your perspective and mentality, because the longer you live there, the more true in your mind it becomes. This is the interesting thing about memories. The interesting thing about memories is that the memories that we have are not the exact recollection of what took place. They change. Also, the longer you tell a lie, the more true it becomes inside of your own mind. And I promise you this, you're a fucking liar. You're a liar. You're a liar to think that no one could possibly understand. You're a liar to think that you're so unique no one else could possibly have those feelings. You're a liar to think that you're the only one in the entire fucking world that's ever had this experience. You're a liar to think that no one could potentially be there to support you. And the more you isolate, and the more you bury it, and the more you suppress it, and the more you hide from it, and the more that you keep it fucking hidden from the world, the more true that story becomes inside of your own mind. That doesn't make the story true. That doesn't make what you're fucking saying truthful. Doesn't make what you're saying the actual truth. What it does is it simply creates a true story inside of your mind because you believe it to be true more than ever before. Modern society doesn't want men to be lions. Modern society doesn't want men to be masculine. Modern society wants men to be effeminate, soft. They want them to be submissive. The world was built on the back of hard men. The world was built on the back of extremely, extremely capable and hard women. Believe it or not, the masculine trait that gets exuded by those who are not only hard, but intelligent, driven, capable, and motivated is the same trait that resides in both men and women. But the problem is that men have been demonized to be masculine and women have been promoted to no longer be feminine. And the next problem is that the first time or an opportunity when a man becomes vulnerable and that vulnerability is laughed at or used against him, I promise you that man will be extremely reluctant to be vulnerable again. And since we live in a society right now that mocks vulnerable men, because this is a fucking problem. We have an entire society that says you're supposed to be vulnerable, you're supposed to be soft, you're supposed to have feelings, you're supposed to be able to express those feelings. And then as soon as men begin to express those feelings and ask questions and potentially open the door to their vulnerability, they're immediately mocked and ridiculed for being weak. They're mocked and ridiculed for not being men. And we see this time and time again. Society says one thing, and then we see women say something different. And all the while, men, we carry this fucking load. And we don't want to talk about it. God forbid we might be perceived as weak. We don't want to talk about it. God forbid we might be perceived as incapable. We don't want to talk about it. God forbid we might be perceived as whiny. The only way to heal the wound is to expose it in order to clean it. The only way to heal the wound is to expose it in order to see the condition of the damage. The only way to heal the wound is to not just wrap it up and hide it from the fucking world and allow it to become infected, because that's in reality what happens. You have to be willing to open it to the air. You have to be willing to show it to the world. You have to be willing to acknowledge the reality of it, and you have to be willing to allow it to heal from the inside out. And the only way to do that is to cut that bitch wide open and talk about it. I had a text message from a really good friend of mine a couple weeks ago, not even last week, in fact. And he was telling me about a good friend of his that's currently living on the East Coast that's going through some serious battles right now, some real hardship. He's battling post-traumatic stress, battling. But he won't open up about it. He won't just talk about it. He won't just come out with it. He won't be vulnerable. And he won't be vulnerable because we're taught, especially in the military, we're taught that we're supposed to be like problem solvers, not problem finders. And if we haven't found a solution, that we should just continue to work towards a solution. And we're taught that we have to carry our own weight. And if we share our problem, then in our minds all too often we're believing that we're not carrying our own weight. What we're actually doing is we're believing that we're putting our load on someone else's back. And another very wise man once told me that pain shared is pain divided. And I thought that's a very interesting thing to consider. Think about this for a second. Pain shared is pain divided. So the longer I keep that pain bottled up inside of me, the more that pain will grow. But if I share that pain, then I'm dividing that pain. I'm offloading that pain. Doesn't mean I'm putting it onto someone else. I'm not making it someone else's responsibility. I'm just no longer choosing to carry it anymore. I talk about mentality. I talk about leadership. I talk about preparation. I talk about the concept of being a savage. But all of those things, none of those things revolve around a lack of vulnerability. None of those things. None of them. Think about a fighter in the ring. Think about a boxer. They're constantly testing space. They're oftentimes leaving themselves a little vulnerable to see what pops open, to see what opportunity they might be able to take advantage of, to see what sort of vulnerability they can use against their opponent. But that's in a fight. So even in a fight, when we're actively fighting, we will sometimes leave intentional openings to see what the other person will do. But I'm not talking about a fight against someone else. I'm talking about a fight within. I'm talking about the fight that you're battling inside of yourself. How can you be a warrior in a garden if you don't know how to cultivate your own fucking plants? How can you be a warrior in a garden if you don't know how to cultivate your own mind? How can you be a true leader if you don't know how to cultivate the mentality of leadership? How can you be a powerful motherfucker if you don't know how to cultivate the power of vulnerability? How can you be a powerful individual if you don't understand how to wield your power as an asset and not allow those things that hold you back to become liabilities in your life? That's the question. So in this text message conversation with my buddy that I was having, he was telling me about his wedding. He lives out in Idaho. He's a very good friend. Known him for a long time. We've always stayed connected. We were talking about his wedding and when it was going to happen and how it was going to go down. It's really exciting. I'm super excited for him. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to take a motorcycle trip out west. I'm going to really enjoy myself. It's going to be spectacular. And all the while, we were talking about this concept that through brotherhood, through tribe, we create connection. And in that connection, we also have the space to become vulnerable. We have the space to heal and grow. We have all got shit that we're battling with. I am not immune to this either. I have got shit that I'm battling with. I have got shit that I am going through every single fucking day. And every single day that I'm going through shit, every single day, 99.9% of that shit, no problem. That's handled. I've already moved down the path. I already know what the shit is. I can already feel the feelings coming on. I can already make adjustments in my day. I can go through the work that I've done in order for me to facilitate maintaining the mentality that I choose to maintain. That 0.1% is the bitch that will come up and bite you in the ass. That 0.1%. The stuff that you want to hide the most, the things that you want to keep concealed the most, the things that you want to keep away from the world the most, that 0.1%, that's that small piece of bacteria that turns into MRSA or staph. That's that small bit of infection that blooms itself rapidly and can create sepsis. That is that 0.1% that gets under your skin and can wreak havoc on the entirety of your life. And a majority of people and the way they live anymore, they don't live in that 0.1%. A majority of people live in that 80%. There's 80% of shit in their life that they don't want to talk about, that they don't want to expose. There's 80% of shit in their life, trauma that they've dealt with that they don't actually ever want to face. There's 80% of shit in their life that they just want to hide from and put their head in the fucking sand. This is the battle that we as men face in modern society. This is the battle that first responders face. This is the battle that veterans face. This is the battle that anyone that exudes masculine traits or masculinity in any way faces, because you're demonized for being masculine, and then you're ridiculed for being vulnerable. And I call bullshit. I call bullshit all the way. I think it's absolute horseshit, and I don't think it's an acceptable thing. At the end of the day, the question comes down to this. What do you want? Do you want to not feel the way you feel? Do you want to not continue to live the life that you're living because it's fucking miserable? Do you want to actually change and heal and grow? Do you want to create a connected tribe of people? Do you want to lead yourself and your family and your business and your community into something greater, into something more successful? Do you want to actually have the life that you truly want and the success that you truly want? Do you want to experience joy and bliss? Do you want to recognize and understand that the only height you can ever achieve is solely based on the lowest level of life you've ever experienced? If you want that, then you gotta fucking change it. If you're hiding from your shit right now, then you're a fucking liar. And if you say you want those things and you're not taking action to fucking change your life, then you're the biggest fucking liar of all. I don't want you to change for anybody else. I don't want you to be vulnerable for anybody else than you. And if you have children, I want to ask this question. Who do you want them to know? Who do you want your children to know? Do you want your children to know the unhappy, the angry, the hidden, the emotionally unavailable version of you? Do you want your children to know the miserable, lack of joy-filled fucking liar that you are right now? Do you want your children to learn that from you, and do you want them to live that same life? Or do you want your children to know what it is to be joyful, to be fulfilled, to find significance from within, to recognize and understand that they have the ability to truly do and become whatever it is they want to do and become simply by making the choices to get there? Do you want them to understand that the struggle of success is far more rewarding than the rotting of not even the rotting, then the struggle of success is far more rewarding than the decay of stagnation? Because that's what we're talking about. We talk about and we hype up and we sensationalize the concept of the struggle, of the grind, of all thing else. Look, there's a struggle in everything that we do. It's fucking hard no matter what. But the question comes down to, what the fuck are we struggling for? All too often, we are actively struggling to stay in this exact same place that we are right now. We are actively struggling to not fucking change. I know I want to change. I know I want a different life. I know I want a different perspective. I know I want to be different. I know I want to be better. But I'm fighting against the knowledge that I want those things. And so I continue to do the same thing I've always done. And I actually have to fight to keep doing the same thing I've always done. What do you want, man? If you're a veteran or a first responder, if you're somebody battling post-traumatic stress right now, if you're battling past demons, if you're battling that internal battle and you are lost in the fucking darkness, I hope this lands with you. There's a few things that I've done that's really helped me a lot. Morning meditation, morning rituals, morning processes. Get up and have a morning routine. Start your day with production. Start your day on purpose. Start your day intentionally. And when I fall out of that routine, I feel it energetically. But when I'm locked into that routine and I am driven and I am hungry and I am knocking it out of the fucking park, there is nothing that can fucking stop me. Nothing. So what do you want? Do you want to continue to live the same life you've always lived? Do you want to continue to live the same life that you have lived over the last however many fucking years or decades? Do you want to continue to allow the internal demons to dictate your actions? Do you want the negative mentality of bullshit and the lies and the stories you continue to tell yourself to be the life you truly want to live? Or do you want to live a life of fulfillment, joy, purpose, intentionality? What do you want? That's the question I have to ask. And the question you have to answer is, what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to continue to make the same choices? Are you going to go fucking get it? This is the Savage Freedoms Podcast.